Friend, I want you to picture a wagon camp, late October, somewhere along the high plains between Fort Laramie and the Bitterroot Passes. Cold snap came in fast that year, the kind that turns a drizzle to sleet in about the time it takes to unhitch a team. A man in that party, and I can't give you his name, because the trail diaries that recorded stories like his usually didn't bother to, pushed on foot ahead of his wagon to scout a crossing. He was warm when he left camp, sweating, even, from the climb. 2 hours later, his own party found him sitting against a cottonwood, half a mile short of where he was headed, not moving. Now here's what the family told the other emigrants that night, and what got written in more than one diary from that same stretch of trail, that same season. They blamed a bear, said they'd heard something big moving in the brush upriver that morning, and put 2 and 2 together. It made a good story. It made a better warning to the younger men in camp. Stay close, keep your rifle loaded, mind the brush. But friend, there wasn't a mark on him. No claw, no bite, no blood. What killed that man wasn't 4 legs and teeth. It was his own wet wool coat, an east wind, and about 90 minutes of nobody around him knowing what they were looking at. Historians who've gone through the westward emigration records. The real tally, not the campfire version, put the number of people who died crossing the Oregon and California trails between 1840 and 1860 at somewhere near 20,000. The overwhelming majority of those deaths were disease, mostly cholera. But of the deaths that weren't disease, the ones from cold, from exposure, from a man just quietly stopping in a field within sight of camp, those outnumber every recorded bear attack on that same stretch of trail by a margin so wide it isn't a close comparison. And that pattern didn't end with the wagon trains. It followed loggers, trappers, homesteaders, deer hunters, right up into living memory. Bears get the blame. Bears get the campfire stories. But there's a piece of plain, ordinary knowledge that used to live in every rural household in this country, knowledge my own family kept written down, because they'd buried people who didn't have it. And when that knowledge faded out of common use, it took a lot more good men and women with it than any grizzly ever did. I'm going to give you that knowledge today, piece by piece, the way my grandfather gave it to me. But I want you to sit with that cottonwood tree a minute longer before we get there, because the last piece of this, the one that actually explains what happened to that man, is the one most folks get backwards even now. We'll come back to him. My people have been on this ground in the Bitterroot Valley since my great-great-grandfather ran trap lines out of here in the 1,870 seconds, and the family kept a journal, patched together, added to, rebound twice that I know of, that got handed down through the men in this family who worked outside for a living. My grandfather taught me most of what's in that journal sitting on the porch of this house, not in a classroom. He wasn't a guide or an instructor. He was a man who'd nearly died of the exact thing I'm fixing to teach you, and made sure it didn't happen to his grandson out of ignorance. So neighbor, pull up a chair. This isn't a lecture. This is what got passed down to me, and what I intend to pass down to you. Now, before I get into the how, I want to answer the question you're probably already asking. If this was common knowledge, where'd it go? I'll tell you straight. I don't think anybody sat in a room and decided to make Americans forget how their own bodies lose heat. That's not how this works, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's a conspiracy. It's simpler, and, in a way, worse than that. It's just what happens when a good story sells better than a boring truth. Starting around 1860, a publishing house out of New York called Beetle and Adams put out what they called dime novels, cheap paper-bound adventure stories, a dime or a nickel apiece, mailed out by the hundreds of thousands. Between 1860 and 1865 alone, that one house put over 5 million copies into American hands. And what sold? Not Settler dies quietly of exposure 90 minutes from camp. What sold was drama. Indian attacks, wild animal maulings, gunfights, cliffhangers with teeth in them. Historians who study this era will tell you it was standard practice. Publishers employed multiple writers under single pen names, cranking out formula adventure at a pace that would make a modern content farm blush. And the formula that moved copies was danger with fangs and claws, not danger with a wind chill. That's not slander against the publishers. That's just the market. A man on a covered wagon, reading by lamplight, wanted a story where the hero fights something. He didn't want a story where the hero forgets to change his socks. So the myth that took root in American popular memory, the one that got repeated in dime novels, then Wild West stage shows, then movies, then 100 years of westerns, was that the frontier was dangerous because of teeth and arrows. Meanwhile, the actual leading killer of people in cold, wet, remote country, the slow, quiet, preventable one, never got a page in Beetle's catalog. Because there's no cliffhanger in, he should have built a shelter 40 minutes sooner. I want to flag something for you here, because I try to be straight with you on this channel. I can't point you to a single ledger that proves the dime novel industry is why this specific piece of knowledge faded out of common households. That's my read on the pattern, not a proven chain of causation, and you should hold it a little loose. What I can tell you for certain is the publishing numbers are real. The emphasis on animal and Indian attacks in that catalog is real and well documented. And the actual cause of death numbers from the trail records are real too. You can connect those dots yourself. I think they connect, Barthold break friend. Because here's where this stops being history and starts being something you can use the next time you're loading a truck for a hunting camp, working a fence line in a cold rain, or just walking your dog too far from the house in weather that turns on you. Picture this. You've been working outside 2-3 hours. You're not cold. You're actually a little warm, maybe sweating under your coat. Your hands feel a little clumsy on the buckles, but you figure you're just tired. You fumble your matches once, twice, and laugh it off. Your speech, if anyone were listening, has gone a little slow and thick, like your tongue's swollen. My grandfather called this the Umbles, a term backcountry guides still use today. You stumble, you mumble, you fumble, and eventually you grumble, meaning you get irritable and stop making sense to the people around you. It's not folklore. It's how your body signals that your core temperature has already started to drop well before you describe yourself as cold. The standard modern reference, wilderness medicine training used by outdoor guide services and search and rescue teams lists exactly this progression as the early warning stage of hypothermia, and it stresses the same hard truth my grandfather stressed. By the time you feel cold in a serious way, you've already been losing the fight for a while. The most common mistake beginners make is waiting for the feeling of cold as their trigger to act. Cold is a late signal. Clumsiness and irritability are the early ones, and they show up while a man still feels basically fine. Which is exactly why that fellow in our cold open didn't turn back. This week, do this. Sit down with whoever you work or hunt or hike with and agree on the words Umbles check as a phrase either of you can say without embarrassment. Not a big speech, just a phrase that means stop and check yourself. Because pride kills people out here faster than weather does. Picture a man in dry cotton clothes at 40 degrees. He's fine. Picture that same man, same 40 degrees, but his clothes are wet. From rain, from sweat, from falling in a creek. He is now in genuine danger, at a temperature that wouldn't threaten him if he were dry. That's not opinion, that's physics. Water pulls heat off your skin around 25 times faster than still air does, and cotton, once wet, holds onto that water and keeps stealing your heat instead of drying out and stopping. This is where cotton kills comes from as a phrase. It's blunt, but the U.S. military learned this the expensive way. Cold weather casualty studies going back to Korea documented soldiers going down from cold injury in temperatures that shouldn't have been fatal, and wet cotton uniforms under insufficient outer layers were a repeated thread in those case reviews. That research is a big part of why modern cold weather gear standards, military and civilian outdoor gear alike, lean so hard on wool and synthetic insulating layers that keep working when they're damp, instead of cotton, which does not. The common beginner mistake is dressing for the temperature on the thermometer instead of dressing for the chance of getting wet. A man who checks the forecast sees 45 and dry and heads out in a cotton hoodie has made a bet he doesn't know he's making. This week, do this. Go through your truck, your barn coat hooks, your kids' school backpacks, and find every piece of cotton that's currently doing the job of an outer or mid-layer for cold weather work. Swap at least one for wool or a synthetic fleece. You don't need to buy new. A used wool shirt from a thrift store does the job. Picture yourself needing shelter fast. Lights going. Weather's turning. You're not getting back to the truck tonight. Most people's instinct is to build something over their heads. My grandfather's journal has one line on this I still hear in his voice. The sky was never what got a man, it was what he laid down on. Direct contact with cold ground pulls heat out of your body through conduction. And it does it continuously, the whole time you're lying or sitting on it, which is exactly the position you're in for the 8 or 10 hours you might spend waiting out a bad night. The standard taught in wilderness survival courses is to build your insulation layer under you before you worry much about the roof. A thick bed of dry leaves, pine boughs, dry grass, anything that traps air between you and the dirt, a debris shelter with 2 feet of packed dry leaves underneath you and a thin roof will keep you alive through a rough night. A tidy-looking lean-to with bare ground underneath will not. The beginner mistake almost universal, is spending all your daylight and energy building an impressive-looking roof and walls, then throwing down a single layer of leaves as an afterthought once it's already dark and you're too tired to gather more. This week, do this. Next time you're out on your land or a local trail, spend 10 minutes actually building a knee-deep pile of dry insulating material. Leaves, pine duff, dry grass, and lie down in it for 2 minutes. Feel what insulated from the ground actually feels like. It's a different experience than you expect. Partall break, friend. We're 3 pieces in, and I haven't given you a single thing that costs money. That's on purpose. This knowledge got passed down in poor households for a reason. It was free, and it worked. Picture the exact moment you need fire most. Everything around you is wet. Your hands are half numb. And this is not a campfire for ambiance. It's the difference in your night. This is precisely when most people's fire-building skill collapses, because everything they know how to do assumes dry tinder that doesn't exist right now. The old trick my grandfather's journal calls fat lighter. What's more widely known as fatwood, the resin-soaked heartwood found in the base and stumps of pine trees, especially where a branch has broken off and the tree sealed the wound with sap, burns even when it's damp, because the resin itself is the fuel, not the wood fiber. You shave it into thin curls with a knife, called feather sticks, exposing more surface area to catch a spark. Search and rescue, and wilderness skills instructors still teach fatwood identification as a core cold fire starting method, precisely because it works when ordinary dry tinder can't be found. The beginner mistake is trying to build a big fire straight off, piling on fuel before you have a solid coal bed established. A fire needs to grow from a coin-sized ember to a fist to a forearm, in that order, patiently, or it smothers itself and you're back to nothing, in the dark, with wet matches. This week, do this. Go find one dead pine stump on your property or a local wooded area, and identify fatwood by smell and weight. It's noticeably heavier, and smells like turpentine compared to ordinary dead wood. Cut a few feather sticks with your pocket knife, just to feel the technique in your hands, before you ever need it under pressure. Picture yourself working hard in the cold, hauling wood, climbing a ridge, pushing through deep snow, and you're sweating right through your base layer, even though it's freezing out. Feels fine in the moment. It's a trap. That sweat is soaking the layer closest to your skin, and the second you stop moving, to rest, to make camp, because you're injured, that wet layer starts stealing your heat, exactly the way piece 2 described, except now it's happening right against your skin, instead of your outer coat. The standard field discipline taught in cold weather operations, military and civilian alike, is to shed a layer before you start sweating heavily, not after. Regulate your temperature by removing insulation during exertion, then relayer immediately once you stop moving. The common mistake is treating your clothing like a single decision you make once, at the truck in the morning, instead of something you actively manage all day the way you'd manage your water intake on a hot hike. This week, do this. On your next cold weather outdoor task, consciously unzip or shed one layer the moment you notice you're starting to sweat, rather than waiting until you're soaked through. Make it a habit before you ever need it in a real situation. Now, here's the piece I promised you. Everything so far keeps you warm and dry. This piece is about the decision that gets people killed even when they know all of the above. And it's the one my grandfather's journal spends the most ink on, because it's the one that took the life of a young man from a neighboring homestead, back when this journal was still being actively written. Picture yourself lost, or running later than planned, or a little disoriented as light fails. The instinct, the one that feels like grit, like the tough, self-reliant thing to do, is to keep moving, push toward where you think camp or the road is. Cover ground. That instinct is precisely what killed the man in our cold open, and it's precisely what kills more lost and cold people than almost anything else. Because pushing on, when you're already showing the Umbles from piece 1, burns the last of your body's fuel, and drops your judgment further, at exactly the moment you need it most. It's a spiral. You get colder, your thinking gets worse, your decisions get worse, you get colder faster. The correct action, the one that is genuinely counterintuitive and genuinely hard to do, is to stop. Search and rescue organizations that train the public on getting found, including programs that specifically teach this to children, all converge on the same core instruction. Once you recognize you're lost, or your condition is deteriorating, stop moving, make yourself easy to find, and conserve your remaining body heat and energy, rather than spending it on unplanned, disoriented travel. A person who stops builds what shelter and fire they can, exactly where they are, and waits gives searchers a fixed point to find and gives their own body a chance to stop the spiral. A person who keeps wandering becomes a moving target in country that's actively taking their body heat, and every hour of wandering both wastes the fuel they need to survive the night and puts them farther from where anyone is looking. The single most common and most fatal mistake, the one at the center of nearly every cold open story like the one I gave you, is treating stopping as giving up. It isn't. Stopping at the right moment, with the right shelter and fire discipline behind it, is the single highest leverage decision a person in trouble can make. It is also the hardest one, because everything in us says push on. That's why it's last. It's the payoff, and it's the one piece of this whole list that requires you to fight your own instincts instead of just your environment. This week, do this. Talk with your family about a simple rule. If someone doesn't check in or show up by an agreed time, the plan is that they stop and stay put, not push forward. Agree on it now, calmly, before you ever need it under stress. So let's go back to that cottonwood tree. That man left camp warm, sweating a little from the climb. Piece 5. Right there. Nobody managing it. He was likely wearing wet wool or cotton against an east wind. Piece 2 unaddressed. When the Umbles set in, piece 1, nobody around to notice, because he'd pushed on ahead alone. And when he started stumbling, instead of stopping right there, building what warmth he could, and waiting, his instinct, the frontier instinct, the one that got mythologized in every dime novel about tough men who never quit, was almost certainly to keep pushing toward camp. Piece 6. That's what closed the loop on him, not a bear in the brush. Here's the whole method, compressed. Check yourself and your people for the umbles. Stumbling, mumbling, fumbling, grumbling, before you feel cold. Dress for wet, not just for temperature. Wool and synthetics over cotton, always. Insulate from the ground first, roof second. Learn fatwood and feather sticks, so fire works even when everything's damp. Shed layers before you sweat. Relayer the moment you stop. When in doubt, stop and stay put. Don't push on into the spiral. I don't want you walking away from this scared of the woods, or scared of a little bad weather. That's not what my grandfather taught me, and it's not what I'm teaching you. This is about being the kind of self-sufficient that doesn't need luck. The kind where you and your family have plain, practical knowledge in your hands instead of fear in your gut. That's the whole point of everything we do here at Cross Hollow. Not doom. Competence. Your starter task this weekend. Find one piece of cotton in your everyday cold weather kit and swap it for wool or fleece, and dig one fatwood sample out of a dead pine stump so you know what it looks and smells like before you ever need it. 10 minutes, no money required, and it's the beginning of real capability. Now I want to hear from you, neighbor. Has your family got a piece of old knowledge like this? Something passed down that saved somebody? Or something you learned the hard way? Put it in the comments. I read every one, and half the topics on this channel started as a comment somebody left me. Next week, we're heading into the root cellar. I'll show you the exact method my great-grandmother's journal lays out for keeping vegetables fresh clear through a Montana winter without a single watt of electricity, and the reason most people's modern root cellars fail within the first month. Stay warm, stay capable, and I'll see you then.